This video is about the fascinating history that you uncover inside the Altoona Railroaders Memorial Museum. I'm kind of an upbeat person, and if I was giving advice to anybody on some things that contribute to my overall positive attitude, it's studying history and having a healthy perspective on my place in the world. You know, long before I came along, there was a whole trail of history that was blazed before me. And if you look back 100 years ago, life was not anywhere like what it is now. There were some very, very hard jobs. There were some very brutal life experiences, and the things that we complain about, if you are able to take a step back and reflect on what life might have been like 100 years ago, you realize that what you're complaining about is probably insignificant. A couple weeks ago, my daughter, myself, and my dad, whose father was a railroad worker, went to the Altoona Railroaders Museum. My dad said that he had actually never really been through it. He'd gone inside for like events or something, but he'd never taken the time to explore. So it was also great for him to just learn and see all the things for the first time. Here are some things that I took away as a history buff, and these are just a few small little tidbits. This museum is filled with hundreds, if not thousands, of little placards that you can read that just kind of remind you of what life was like 100 years ago. The museum isn't just a history that reflects, oh hey, you know, sometimes I think going into it, you think you're gonna hear a lot about, oh, here's how they built a steam engine or whatever. It's more than that. It's about the identity of a city, Altoona, which goes hand in hand with the development of the railroad. At one time, it was Railroad City. It was the most important city in the world when it comes to the railroad. It was the capital of the railroad. And so here are some takeaways, and you might know some of this, but some of this was completely new to me. The Horseshoe Curve. That's the reason Altoona really became the railroad hub of the world. The Horseshoe Curve was what allowed us to build a railroad across the Alleghenies. Before the railroad in Pennsylvania, you had Philadelphia and you had Pittsburgh, those two big cities, and you needed to get between them. Life was hard. Before the railroad, you would be on horseback, you would be climbing over the Allegheny Mountains, and it took weeks. It was brutal, it was long, it was a hard trek. But then steam engines come along, steam-powered locomotives, and those steam-powered locomotives needed to build a slow grade up the mountain. And that's where the Horseshoe Curve came in. And so it was so important that when World War II was happening, it was actually targeted by the Nazis in a spy operation. It wasn't just thought up. They landed on shore. The operation was broken up. They were planning explosives and destroying the Horseshoe Curve. Somebody defected, they were captured, the plot was foiled, and people were executed because of it. So I'd heard about that because I did a story once upon a time in the news talking about that. So I had heard that story a little bit, but it's fascinating to think that America, as large as it is, and all the things you would think would be on the top list of targets for the Nazis to try and disrupt America, Altoona and the Horseshoe Curve is at the top of the list. That's how important this place was 100 years ago, 80 years ago. Try and picture this happening today. At 7 o'clock in the morning, a whistle goes off. And if you look outside, everybody is leaving their house simultaneously and going into work at the same location. Picture every house on your block, everybody having the same alarm clock every day that tells them to report to work. That was Juniata. That's where my pap worked. And my dad says he can recall, what it was like in those days where the Juniata shops were what you did if you lived in that area. They said the town kind of bent towards the railroad when that whistle went off. And you can just picture there'd be, all the people leaving their house at the exact same time every single day going to the railroad. It controlled your life like that. And your lunch break, it was a whistle went off and you ran home, had lunch for 20 minutes and then you headed back. Two-way telephone lines installed in their house. And so there was a little placard that described how if you missed the telephone call from the Juniata shop saying you need to report to work, they said you were suspended for a month. So picture being on call right now. If you missed the phone call to report to work, you're suspended for a month. You are married to that telephone. You're not going on vacation. You're not wandering, too far from home. You have a phone that if it rings, you miss the phone call and you're off the job for a month. Speaking of jobs that sucked, they have where the fireman, that was the occupation, the fireman, they have a K4 replica, and the fireman, if you picture Back to the Future when they're throwing the logs into the fire to get the steam locomotive up to 88 miles per hour, there was a fireman who was required to keep the fire burning during the travel. And so you're talking about hours and hours sometimes where you were shoveling coal into a fire pit, one shovelful at a time. They said 20 tons of coal, one shovelful at a time into a fire pit, helping that locomotive get up to sometimes 90 miles an hour. Picture that being your job. Shoveling coal fast, one shovelful at a time, 20 tons. There's an exhibit on the second floor, a little TV screen that talks about the train derailment that happened with the zoo. So there was a series of cars that had the animals for the zoo in them, and it derailed. And I thought it was interesting because they talked about how, I think it happened outside of Tyrone. A lot of the animals were never found. And so they said that these animals could have survived and existed by just, wandering up into the mountains. And so today there might be some mysterious tiger kind of wandering around Tyrone.
Wow. This whole thing's just a separate little, so you can see through there.
I almost missed the Kelly's Pub exhibit. It was down at the end of the hall, and it really kind of struck me. It was just a window that said Kelly's Pub in it, and I thought, oh, I almost missed this. I almost walked right by it. The little neon sign. And because there's so many things inside the museum, there's little like corridors and ways to go that you could miss it. But it was basically a replica of Kelly's Pub. And the description that was talking about having to wave away the smoke, it was like a curtain, and you'd have to like punch it away in order to see the person beside you. Just picture, you know, life in the early 1900s. Every single person is probably smoking in the bar. And it talked about a water trough that ran along the base of the bar where you spit tobacco. You know, you just, instead of using the spittoon, the brass spittoon, you just spit down into a moving water trough at the base of the bar. That story about that is going to come into play in my next video. Remember that, because it's going to be significant in the next video that I put out.
You're bad enough about it already, you darn hoghead, you.
And they said, you know, if you were hungry, Kelly would whip you up a sandwich free of charge. So you came there to drink, and they're just going to make you a sandwich for free. Try to pretend, use your imagination to fill in what that would have looked like. A bar that the smoke is so thick, it's blue, and you have to knock it away just to see the person beside you, and people are just spitting on the ground. And you know, you came there to drink, probably drink hard, and the food is such an afterthought that they just, you know, he'll make you a sandwich free of charge. So that was my experience at the Altoona Railroaders Museum. Like I said, the water spittoon underneath the bar. Here's how I'll tease my next video. Me going into the Altoona Railroaders Museum, learning that fact enabled me,
One of only 12?
to put together a video that now has 3 million views. I put together a short form video that got 3 million views across TikTok and Instagram. That was only possible because I had learned that little nugget of information at the Altoona Railroaders Museum. That's going to be the topic of my next video that I put out, and my quest for interesting content. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Altoona Railroaders Museum, it's for anybody that is interested in learning about the history of Altoona, the history of the railroad. If you want to take a step back in time and just try to envision what life was like 100 years ago, 150 years ago, it's a fascinating place to visit. I would put it on my list of musts if you're visiting Altoona. All right, have a great day.